Okay, so here it is. BSD 113 Economics, TP1 2018. Assessment 2 is your research essay. It's a 1,200-word essay. It is due Friday, the 11th of May, at a minute to midnight. Not a minute past. At the moment, I'm thinking we'll be using safe assign rather than turn it in. We'll talk further on that. I already get that cleared because it allows you to, and it allows me to check plagiarism stuff a lot easier. Safe assign's much better. All right, so here's the setup. Okay, you're on work experience at the farm lobby group Cane Growers. So we actually do have Cane Growers Queensland, and they represent the sugar industry, the sugarcane growing industry, which used to be a very powerful industry in Queensland. So over a morning tea break, a discussion begins about how the UK government has introduced a new tax on the sugar content of drinks. And there's a reference there to Hawkes 2018, which is an article from The Conversation. A friend of mine has been living in London for about 25 years. His 14-year-old son found out about that and saved his pocket money up for about 6 weeks to go around and buy all his favourite soft drinks before the tax arrived and made them more expensive. So Riley's bedroom's got a corner just full of like Dr. Pepper that he got on the cheap. I think he's going to try and make some money out of it. So a few of the more ruggedly individualistic members of the staff make scornful comments about the British becoming soft and overly reliant on their nanny state arrangements. So some people will be like, oh, that's absurd, you can't be taxing that. They're grown-ups and they can make choices. And you know, that kind of comment tends to come from people who are into that strongly individualistic thing. I make a choice and they can make a choice, and if it does them harm, then I don't care. You know, and we shouldn't have public health because then I have to pay for them. Everyone should pay for private health. Those guys. Okay. However, the conversation takes a different turn when somebody pulls up statistics on their smartphone on obesity, which reflect badly on Australia's performance in reducing obesity. So it turns out that, you know, we're not doing any better. We're not. And the stats are scary. For example, in 2011-12, 62.8% of Australians aged 18 years and over were either overweight or obese. I'm one of them. So, an argument ensues that body weight issues are not the business of policymakers. It's nothing to do with policy, some people will say. Other people say, yeah, it is actually. So, however, you say that it's a bit more complicated than that, remembering something that your lecturer in BSD 113 said, and that obesity is associated with an increased risk of disease, poor quality of life, and imposes high financial, economic, and social costs on society. And that's supported by this reference here, Obesity, a National Epidemic and its Impact in Australia, 2014. It's in the reading list that you'll see. So attention in the room now focuses on you. Recall that your lecturer had spoken about how in some markets where the negative effects are not captured in the price of a good, it can lead to overconsumption of a good and an inefficient equilibrium. So we're consuming these goods, these sugar-sweetened beverages. It's done at a price level that's too low. We will consume too many of them, and we will generate costs to the community in excess of the benefit of the consumption. And we looked at how a tax on a good can move the market back to a socially efficient level of consumption. We just stepped through the negative consumption externality graphs before. So, confident in your understanding of economics, you say that the sugar tax may be a potential solution to the obesity problem. You note that some of the recent research for a sugar tax of 20% in Australia has the potential to realise up to 170,000 healthy life years over a lifetime of the 2010 Australian population. So we do have some research from Queensland University, as it happens, Vietnam, stating that if we were to put a tax on sugar, the value of sugar in these drinks, and raise the price of these drinks, taking the population of Australia at 2010, simply doing that, would add 170,000 healthy life years to the Australian population. So as a whole, the Australian population would add 170,000 years of healthy life to the group's performance, which if you calculate it out, works out to another 3 or 4 days of healthy life for everyone in the country, simply by putting a little bit of tax on the sugar in a drink. If you can find 8 or 10 things like that, everyone lives another 6 weeks or something. It's not a bad deal. Okay, so someone argues that the sugar taxes are not the best policy to reduce consumption, and that there are much better initiatives. You acknowledge that there are indeed other policy initiatives that could reduce sugar consumption. So Hawkes, another one from Hawkes in 2015, provides a good summary of alternative policy solutions, and a quick search on the Conversation website reveals how behavioural economics can be used as a policy tool in the prevention of obesity. So you can see Martow 2016 on that. So, desperate to draw the conversation to a close, you say that without a proper economic analysis, it wouldn't be appropriate to draw any further conclusions. So I haven't really got to the question. We've set it up. Here we have a little reading list. This is where you start. I would expect that most of these will be in your essay. I would expect you will find other good quality resources as well. So here's something you can get started with, and that is go get these articles and read them. Here's your research task. Okay, your contribution to the tea room discussion was overheard by the CEO of Cane Growers. The CEO was impressed by your insights and asked that you write a critical overview of the introduction of a sugar tax in Australia from an economics perspective. Okay, just to be clear here, a critical overview doesn't mean an overview that's critical of it and says it's a terrible idea. This is just an unbiased review where you're critiquing the arguments. So you're not to say, it's not we're asking you to write one saying, sugar tax is a bad idea. We're just saying, go in and have a look at it and come back with your honest response, supported from the literature. Okay, so at that point you're going to go, oh, God, I've got to do this thing for the CEO. So you give me an email, and I suggest you do the following. 1. Section 1 of your essay should be an overview of the obesity epidemic globally and in Australia. This should include the size of the problem and the estimated cost of obesity to the nation. So, how many people are fatties? What share of the population are, overweight and obese? How is that different from 10 years ago? Is it growing quickly, or is it pretty stable? What's it all cost? What are the impacts on the budgets in the health system? That's the sort of data you're looking at there. You might compare us to somewhere overseas or some sort of global average while you're at it. So as an economist, we generally start by framing the problem. Or in this case, we're going to call it setting the context. In this part of the essay, you need to clearly articulate what the issue is from a societal perspective. This is not simply a case of stating, I think it's a problem because. You need to present information, including data, on the impact of obesity and the proposed changes to policy. What are the impacts of obesity and overweight? Without considering soft drinks, just what's happening in the public health sphere around this topic. How fat are we? How quickly are we getting fatter? And what's all of this costing us? Okay. So you're going to need to read a lot for that. You're going to need to find good data. You're going to need multiple sources. They need to be high quality sources, so scholarly articles from journals, not from newspapers or magazines. Okay. I'd expect to see some of the data tabled up, a figure, a table, a graph. And if you want to get more than a 4 for that section, you'll have to have it, and we'll talk about that in the CRA. Okay, the second section is theory. So section 1, data. Section 2, theory. Here, we want a description of the relevant economic model to show how a sugar tax would reduce consumption of unhealthy foods, that is sugary drinks in this case. So, we just went through it. we're looking at a negative externality in consumption. And we've got some slides in today's lecture notes that show you what they are, how to do that. And I think if you go into chapter 11 of your textbooks, you will see a fully worked model on negative externality in consumption. Your job is to make sense of that, reproduce it, and describe the model to me and show me how it works. So, we've been pretty focused on one key theory so far this semester, and that is supply and demand. You know, X marks the spot. So in this case, it is overconsumption of a good that is potentially leading to a socially inefficient outcome. So to correct for that, you can use the economic theory to demonstrate how decreasing sugar consumption will move the market to a socially efficient level of consumption. And yes, we expect you to include the relevant graph, and it might be two graphs, where you show me, here's how it is before we do something, and here's all of the social costs, here's how we fix it. Or you might do it in one graph. I don't care. They're both fine. Just do them clearly. This is from the text. I do not need to see you reading lots of theory in other places. You can get your theory straight from the text. I'd prefer you did. Stick with the text. Textbook. Is that clear? Not you know, econhelp.com and all of that bullshit. Just go to your textbook. There's a perfectly good model there, and you can simply show me you understand it. Okay, the third part is the critical analysis. This is where most of the marks are. And this is the hard part. So here, we want a critical analysis as to whether a sugar tax will be effective in practice in correcting the market failure. So your critical analysis should be informed by the academic literature. So you're working to a word limit, so you need to be selective and concise with your arguments. So again, your analysis needs to be objective. We expect you to draw on appropriate academic literature and or present empirical evidence to support your arguments about either the limitation of the proposed policy and suggest alternative policies that may be more effective. Ah, and I've left Louisa's name in there. I've stolen this from Louisa down at faculty, so change Louisa to Phil. Okay, what we want are two limitations of the tax. So in the first section, data, you've shown me there's a problem. In the theory section, the second part, you've shown me the basic Pigovian tax model. How do you reform the negative externality in consumption? Here's the theory. The third part is, fine, we've got theory. Now, out in the real world, what are two problems that we found? So, there's heaps of reasons we could have problems. One could be the elasticity properties of the product. People's demand for these things might be strongly inelastic, or a group of people's demand for it might be strongly inelastic. Could be that fat people really like them. Other issues might include government failure, rent-seeking behaviour, private interest view, all of those sorts of things. That is not an exhaustive list. Okay, so these taxes have been used in other places. There are articles, good quality academic articles, that assess the impact of these types of sugar taxes in other jurisdictions. Your job is to go and find those and talk about two of the limitations, the areas where it didn't work so well, in the wild, in real life, in other jurisdictions. We're considering doing it in Australia. What can we learn from other countries or other places' experience of it, where similar taxes have been tried? What didn't work? So that's the first part of the critical analysis. Go and find two examples of two limitations of these taxes from real life. Now, it's not very hard. Once you start looking, you go, oh, okay. There's quite a bit about this out there. And there's lots of places that have tried it, and there's a lot of articles being written about how effective has it been. So your job is to get to those, identify a couple of the shortcomings and write them up. Okay, the second part of your critical analysis is to produce or to present me with one alternative. What else could we do? Like, we've got our theory. What's something else we could try? How else do we do it? You know, we've looked at the tax. We looked at the theory of the tax. I've now looked at the reality of the tax and found a couple of shortcomings. What's something else we could try if we decided, maybe we don't want the tax? Or, yeah, we do want the tax, we want to run the tax with some non-tax policy. What is a policy we can run? There will be policy alternatives. It's not like the government's only response can be a tax. So, write up one of those. It's not your job to say that the alternative policy is better or worse. Just that it, that it exists and here's how it would address the problem. So it could be lots of things. You might be educating people about the perils of drinking sugary drinks or whatever it is. So, that's the essay task. Data. What's the problem? How big a problem is it? How quick is it changing? What's it costing? That's the first section. Second section, theory. Negative externality and consumption. Walk me through the theory, straight from the textbook. Section 3, which is most of the marks, go find some literature about this tax in the real world and develop 2 stories about limitations that people have found with this tax. Where hasn't it worked very well and why? Then, give me an alternative. Given that it doesn't necessarily work fabulously everywhere, what's something else you can hand to a minister? Say, look, the CEO of cane growers might want to go in and say, look, this tax has been tried, and in a couple of places, these are the big problems. So it's not a perfect solution. Here's an alternative. Minister, you could think about doing this instead, rather than putting a tax on. Oh, what have I done? Nothing. All right. Dun, dun. So we do expect you to use the references we showed you earlier on in the background section. We expect you to show evidence that you've read and understood that stuff. We also expect you to keep going. We expect that you'll find your own decent quality literature and use that and use it well. So, here's some big reminders. One, you're reminded that this is an academic piece of work. This is an academic essay. This is not a feature article in a newspaper or a magazine article or a note to your boss or your girlfriend or something. So you'll write an unbiased, informed, critical economic essay, and it is not a political document. You are not an advocate. You are an economist. Your job is to assess what's in front of you and just let it fall out where it falls out. Even if you think a tax would be a great idea, if as an economist you look at it and go, tax isn't going to work, that's what you report. If you think, I hate taxes, but as an economist, oh yeah, this is going to work. Like, your job is to be unbiased. Get rid of your own biases and don't push other people's biases. Just assess it. Okay. We expect that your essay will be rigorous, academically rigorous, with references to relevant data and academic literature. If you make a claim, you need a reference for that claim. If you're going to say, this tax was tried in Mexico, you better support that by authors who said this tax was tried in Mexico. In Mexico, they found that they had XYZ problem. Provide support for that. That's been noted by this author in this paper. So all of your claims need to be supported from the literature. And don't get drawn into the emotive arguments, the emotional arguments. You know, they're interesting enough. As a private citizen, that's fine. You can go, oh, it's terrible, poor people drinking too much with their rotten teeth. You're right, that probably is terrible. As an economist, it's not your job to feel anything particularly. You can do that when you go home. Okay, it's 1,200 words. This is how I suggest you think about laying it out, or at least begin. About 100 words to introduce it. This essay is about this. It'll proceed from here to provide background of the data, then we'll do the theory, then we'll turn to critical analysis. We'll find two problems with the thing, and I'll suggest an alternative, and then we'll wrap it up with a conclusion. Okay, that first section, setting the context, presenting your data, a couple of 100 words. Should have a table or figure or a couple of them even, if you want to get really good marks. About 400 words to describe the model. Now, if you think you can describe the model properly in 300 words and go to 300 words on your introduction in the data, feel free. That's okay. And your critical analysis, I reckon 400 to 500 words, something like that. Because you've got to get two shortcomings or two limitations of the tax in and an alternative. So, you know, 400 or 500 words, somewhere around there. About 40% of all the marks are here. This is about 25%. I think this is about 15%. And then you've got, you know, your style and your referencing and stuff make up the balance. Okay, a little bit there about how to present it. I'll have more to say about the submission. It's not for another month. I'm hoping we use SaferSign. I've just got to get the nod on that. You guys might have used Turnitin more often, but I prefer to use SaferSign if we can. Okay, what's an example of a scholarly source? Okay, academic journals. There are literally tens of thousands of academic journals you can access as a QUT student straight through the library databases. From home, from here, from your phone, your laptop, whatever you want. It's not like you don't have access to this stuff. That would include things like university working papers and those sorts of publications. They're fine. Government and related departments or organisations. So the ABS, Australian Bureau of Statistics, yeah. Department of Health, they've got a report on obesity in Australia? Sure. Some international organisation like the World Health Organisation, they've got a report on obesity generally, like globally, that has some Australian data, feel free. These are good organisations. Probably in this case it wouldn't be central bank articles, but you know, you might get, you know, the health department, National Health Department going through it. Reliance on non-scholarly sources as part of your research is to be avoided. So examples of the non-scholarly sources include things like newspaper reports, tacky magazine articles, non-peer reviewed articles and reports. So be really careful with anything that comes out of a political party. It's likely to be crap. And consultation reports, consultant companies. So, you know, if the sugary drinks industry hires, you know, KPMG to do a report on how awesome soft drinks are, you can be pretty sure that KPMG are going to find that soft drinks are awesome. And those reports should just be ignored because they're being paid to say that. Subject-based dictionaries and or glossaries. Wikipedia, it's a great place to start. I use Wikipedia every day, I donate to it every year, and I don't want to see any Wikipedia references in your reference list. Wikipedia is where you start looking, not where you stop looking. And things like personal blogs and websites. You know, when some celebrity chef has a view on sugar, that's nice, but who cares? Their qualifications are in cooking. Which is great. I mean, everyone can appreciate the work of a great chef, but that doesn't mean they're qualified to talk on the tax implications of sugary beverages, because they're not. In the same way, I'm not going to walk into the restaurant and tell them how to cook a steak. Look, non-scholarly sources have a role. So you guys should already be reading news websites and informing yourself about general kind of policy issues. I mean, if you're going to be professionals when you leave university, that's kind of, people assume you know what's going on in the world. Okay, there is, with non-scholarly sources, though, a bit of a hierarchy of those that are a bit more acceptable that you might engage with. There are some good quality newspapers out there. So in Australia, something like the Australian or the Financial Review would be considered, okay, it's a newspaper, but that's generally written to a high standard with high standards of reporting. In Britain, it would be something like the Financial Times. So FT would normally be considered okay. And we might have some specialist magazines that we kind of go, yeah, all right. If you cite something from The Economist, I'm not going to be too upset. If you cite something from the Women's Weekly, I'm probably going to be pretty upset. So out of something like The Economist, I'll live with it. If it's a good quality piece from The Conversation, which is an online source that we'll look at further, and where you should be spending some time pretty early in your research process, I won't have a problem with that. Okay, we'll wrap this up in a minute. I'll just see if I can get to The Conversation. Oh, what do you know? The Conversation. Let's go. Let's. Sugar tax. Here we go. This has been quite a busy topic lately, primarily because there's a sugar tax that's just been introduced into the United Kingdom. That was politically a pretty hot thing. So here's a whole bunch of stuff about that here. You've also got from Sarah Fessenden from University of British Columbia how these sugar taxes might hurt people. So, you know, she's an anthropologist. Yeah, I wouldn't pay too much attention to an anthropologist, but anyway. Here's someone saying, look, this isn't about nanny state, it's just sound policy. Yada, yada, yada. So there is some stuff there. Oh, what do you know? So that wouldn't be a bad place to have a look. Most of the reading list you should be able to access online. Where'd that go? Oh, here we go. Dun, 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 dun. So, for example, I'd suggest that something like The Guardian's not a bad source. I wouldn't rely on them very much. So, Mexico's sugar tax leads to fall in consumption for second year running. I wouldn't use this as the article I cited, but I'd read this in order to get a feel for what's going on and, you know, maybe get a bit of a steer on where to get the good information. Yeah. So, Mexican Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública. Wonder if they publish anything in English. Yeah, they do. So, what do you know? Oh, here's some more information down here. Anything with percentages is good. So, you know, you can start working your way through them. Where are we? Sydney Morning Herald. Oh, what have I done? Oh, okay. Now, Jamie Oliver's a celebrity chef, so I'd ignore what he has to say, but you'll probably find some useful stuff in here. Go, Jamie. and it takes you way through some of this stuff. It's got links to some useful things. So again, I wouldn't use the Times or the Sydney Morning Herald as my source, but I'd read something from the Times or the Sydney Morning Herald and go find the sources that they're quoting, have a look at those, build something out of that. The conversation, I think you can quote that directly, but, and I think I've minimised the conversation, but let's go back. So let's go here. One good thing about the conversation, not this one, but many of them. A number of these, not this one, will lead you to a reference list. They'll say, here's where I'm getting it from, but they will have hot links to a lot of other things. So figures show that 58% of women say, so sugar drinks lead to weight gain. So we've got a link there going somewhere else. That's from a diabetics journal. So that's a good quality source. There's heaps of these sorts of things. So as you're looking around, you'll very quickly find that you've got lots and lots of sources. You have to make judgments about how much to read and what are the standard of these sources. But you won't have a shortage of places with information. All of these things will have links to various things. So, according to the UK Treasury, over 50% of soft drink manufacturers, including retailers' own brands, have already reduced sugar levels because they knew there was a tax coming, responding to the stick of the legislation. So we already know that 50% of the soft drinks in the UK, the manufacturers reduced the sugar content before the sugar tax came, just in preparation. Like, they're going to do this, we better change the recipe and get it different and get it settled down before this tax arrives. So the tax has actually had a pretty big effect already, even without being brought in. So, lots and lots of things to think about. All right, let's go up and do the, the workshop up in 336. I'll see you up there in about 5 or 10 minutes.